When we are doing like check ride preparations, when we go in our pre-flight briefings and our debriefings, here are some of the things that we find that a lot of people are confused about instrument approaches. Item number one, when we are briefing the touchdown zone elevation, we forget why we're doing it. So a lot of instructors will confuse this when they say, well, we can go down 100 feet of minimums, which is incorrect. What actually the regulation and when you're doing an approach, when you get down to minimums and if you see the approach lighting system inside, you can descend down to 100 feet above touchdown zone. That is, regardless if it's a precision or non-precision approach, it is still 100 feet above touchdown zone. Not what many people think, that is 100 feet below minimums. Second mistake a lot of people have is when they're briefing, for example, an ILS or localizer approach, they actually, when they start reading the title, they're going to read, well, we're briefing the ILS or localizer, and they're actually briefing two different approaches, right? So while here in the New York, New Jersey area, when we're doing an instrument approach, they're very similar. That doesn't really apply everywhere else. So as an example, if you look at San Luis, which is Kilo Sierra Bravo Papa, they have a chart for the localizer and then they have a chart for the ILS. So if you're briefing the ILS, stick to the ILS items, glide slope intercept, altitude, right? Versus a final approach fix. If you're briefing the localizer, brief what altitude restrictions you're gonna have past the final approach fix, which is normally one of the biggest changes. So this will lead into common mistake number 3. A lot of people are always into the habit, because that's what they've been flying, is to always time their approaches at the final approach fix. And the reasoning behind it is because if I lose the glide slope, I can just revert back to a localizer. That is kind of wrong in several accounts. One is because, let's look at just the safety and common sense, right? When you're briefing the approach, you're briefing one specific approach. If you're better than me, great, but personally, I can only pretty much remember one approach at a time. I can remember altitudes and I can remember what restrictions I have with that certain approach. On an ILS, once you hit the final approach fix, you track the glide slope all the way down to minimums. On a localizer, you generally have, or you could have, altitude restrictions that you gotta meet at or above. So if I'm doing the ILS and I'm not gonna transition to a localizer, if I lose a glide slope at the final approach fix, I'm gonna go miss. I'm gonna go get resequence, go set up. I'm gonna set up the flight management system, load the approach, check the approach, and brief the approach, which are the 3 items that you have to do for every approach. Or you don't have to. It's a good idea that you do them. You gotta do them, right? Because there are certain mistakes in the databases. So the moral of the story is, if you are flying a ILS, brief the glide slope intercept altitude, brief everything that pertains to the ILS. If you're doing a localizer, brief how you also, all the items pertaining to the localizer, because this is gonna lead to item number 4. When you're flying a technologically advanced aircraft, such as an airplane with a G1000, you have several modes to identify the missed approach. Some of the ways to identify a missed approach in a technologically advanced aircraft are via the flight management system, which is the primary way, because you load the approach, you check the approach, and brief the approach. So if that missed approach is at the right point, you should be able to rely on it. The other one is using DME. Another option is using radios, which is a little bit more basic, but you will still have that option, right? The last option on a technologically advanced aircraft to identify the missed approach is time. That's normally used for people who are, or pilots who are flying airplanes with 6-packs and very basic airplanes. As you move on in your pilot career, you're gonna be flying more technologically advanced airplanes that have Collins Avionics, Rockwell, Garmin. You're gonna have a lot more features, so it's better to start doing the procedures right the first time, because once you make that transition to a bigger airplane or something that has more of avionics, you are gonna be doing something very basic, which doesn't really translate on how we fly on the day-to-day basis. This is gonna lead to item number 5. Another mistake that a lot of pilots have is if you get established on the glide slope and localizer early, and what I mean by early is prior to a final approach fix, a lot of pilots think that they're already established on the approach. Well, that is wrong because the approach starts at the final approach fix. That's when everything starts counting, okay? You can be established 10 miles out, but if the final approach fix is until 5 miles, and after you cross it, that's when the approach starts. Not when you capture the glide slope and localizer early. Another common mistake for pilots when they're doing instrument approaches is what weather controls the minimums for the approach. So the options really are clouds and visibility, clouds, or visibility. The correct answer is visibility, because once you reach minimums, you need to have the in-flight visibility to continue to land. If you don't have the in-flight visibility, you have to go missed. For commercial operations, which are 121 or 135, before the final approach fix, if we don't have the visibility required for the approach, we cannot cross the final approach fix. For Part 91, we can continue with the approach, except once we get down to minimums, we are bounded still by minimums. So if you don't have the half a mile, the 3/4, the 1 mile, whatever the minimums are listed for the visibility minimums on that approach chart, you are not legal to continue to land after you have either the touchdown zone, after you have the approach lighting system, which allows you to kind of point number 1, which is 100 feet above touchdown zone. And if you then don't have the half a mile, whatever the requirement is, and you don't have the runway environment inside, you have to execute a miss because you are legally bounded by that minimums of the visibility, not the cloud coverage. Now, if you are shooting an approach and you see that it's 100-foot ceilings, half a mile visibility, and your approach requires 200-foot ceilings and half a mile, well, it is you as the pilot in command to have the discretion to know that, hey, you may not be able, you may not have those minimums. However, you can actually shoot that approach all the way down to minimums if you're Part 91. We do have other videos that are going to help you for your instrument rating. We do have videos for loading an instrument approach and how to brief instrument approaches, and we actually have variations for Jeppesen and the FAA charts. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe,